Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Calm Conversation, a show where we dive into the career path and time in the Department of Communication for our faculty, our students, and our alumni here at Waynesburg University. On episode 2, I am pleased to be joined alongside instructor Doug Wilson, a department faculty member here at Waynesburg University and a person who has worked at WANB, a local radio station, for a number of years. I think a good way to start this interview would be asking you, what age did you realize that you wanted to get into the radio industry?
Actually, when I was in high school, I took an aptitude test where they give you all of these questions to try to point you in a direction for, even in high school, what classes you might be best at taking to, sort of guide you down the right path. And believe it or not, the number one selection that came back for me was radio DJ. I actually was friends with a gentleman who worked in radio at the time and talked with him, and his exact words to me were, "Do not go into radio." And this would have been in the 1980s. And so I kind of put that off to the side. And then when I was a senior in high school, started looking at colleges and honestly wasn't going to go to college. That was not really on my radar, but I promised my parents that I would look into it. Had an opportunity to have a conversation with a recruiter from Waynesburg College, a recruiter who actually ended up going on to make quite a name for himself here at what is now Waynesburg University. The name may be familiar. Tim Thyreen was actually the gentleman who sat and more or less convinced me that I should be looking at Waynesburg College.
Okay.
And the reason was there were so many different things that they could offer, one of those being radio. And came here, got very interested within the first week, signed up to do the radio. At that time, it was an extracurricular. There were no courses that were really offered for radio, and found that I really loved it. And that was a really long answer for it started in high school.
Who was your biggest influence growing up?
You mean in radio?
It can be in radio or in life. You could have two separate answers.
Well, my father has always been a big influence, and my mother as well. Just good people. And I know that sounds hokey, and I'm sure that's an answer you probably get from a lot of people. But they really were a good moral compass for me. And admittedly, I did not always follow their advice and made my mistakes, but at the same time, they were very willing to help me come back on track. In radio, there are a number of different individuals. You having had a couple of my radio courses, you've heard me talk about Alan Freed and Dick Clark, even though Dick Clark really wasn't a radio DJ. Casey Kasem, for me growing up.
Role models.
Yo, my, yeah. And not just because of his radio personality, but his work ethic. I mean, you want to talk about a guy in the 1980s and early 90s that did a little bit of everything. Casey Kasem, he was definitely that guy.
So you've been in the radio industry a long time now, over 25 years.
If you count my years here at Waynesburg, when I was here, Waynesburg College, over 30 years.
Over 30.
Yeah.
What's the secret to longevity in the business?
Being willing to do anything. And I know that sounds like I'm trying, almost giving a pat answer, but I've done everything from writing scripts to running board to hosting a show to doing interviews. It is rare that I say, no, I won't do that. There have been a couple of things. I don't like doing sales. That's one of the things that I have kind of put my foot down, and yet I have done that as well. So,
you also, and you talked about this a lot when I've had you for classes, you also run the Oldies show on Sunday nights for WANB, and that's pretty much how you got your foot in the door from what I've read online.
It is. They had actually initially had hired me just to host the show. Initially, it was supposed to be a 3-hour show, And
now it's what, 6 hours, right?
yeah, in fact, the week before I started as host, the manager of the radio station called me in and said, I was going to be running 6 hours, but the first 3 hours was going to be a pre-recorded show. And then at 9 o'clock, I would take over and run the oldies show. And she called me and she said, do you think you could do 6 hours of oldies? I'm fresh out of college. Of course I can do that. And almost 28 years later, it's still a 6-hour oldies show.
You still love doing it?
I do. It's my baby. The oldies format is the music that I really latched onto even as a kid, partly because that was what my parents had listened to, and so listening to their material. But it's universal music. Anybody can identify with it. Songs about love, songs about school, songs about falling out of love, songs about cars, songs about love. Did I mention songs about love? But everybody can identify with that kind of material. And even the silly songs, like Purple People Eater, They're Coming to Take Me Away, haha. They're goofy songs, but everybody can identify with a goofy song.
Now, I think this would roll into how busy you are. So you have the oldies show on Sunday night.
Yeah.
You have to wake up at 4 or so in the morning, Monday morning.
Correct.
To go host the morning show.
Correct.
And then you roll over to Waynesburg and teach a class at 12 noon. What does your brain feel like at 1 p.m.?
By 1 o'clock, and typically, I actually then have a lunch meeting with the head of the department from 1 until about 1:30 or 1:45, because it's an opportunity for the head of the department and I to kind of compare notes. Is there anything that needs done at the college radio station, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go 2 o'clock instead of 1 o'clock. My brain is mush. I literally drive home and crawl into bed and take a 2 or 3 hour nap, and then get up and get ready to do it all over again.
How important is time management in the field?
Oh my goodness. When I first started, time management wasn't as big a deal because I wasn't teaching. I say only doing the oldies show and then the evening shift. But even then, now that I think back on it, I had a family. When I first started, I had a beautiful young lad that was the center of my world, and then a few short years later, then I had a beautiful daughter and added yet another son. And so juggling all of that became extremely important because I didn't want to be that dad that looked back and went, boy, I wish I had been at that ball game, or I wish I had been at that play. I won't say that I never missed anything they did, but I'm pleased to say that it was rare that I missed something.
How long have you been teaching at Waynesburg?
I honestly have no idea. I really don't. I sat down a while ago to try to figure that out, and part of the problem was I taught one semester in the fall, and then I didn't teach the following semester, and then the following year I started teaching again and have taught continuously. I don't remember.
The years just aren't.
Yeah, I don't remember what year it was.
What's the most rewarding part about teaching?
Oh boy. I can't pick one thing. There are a few things. In the radio aspect, having students that come back and say, boy, what you taught me in this class, I've really been able to apply. Even if it's, you mentioned time management. I've had several students who have come back and said, we talked briefly in class about time management, and I've really been able to apply that to the job. Thank you. One of the other courses that I teach is business and professional speaking. And I have had numerous students who have come back and said, I can't begin to tell you how much that has helped me in ways that I didn't think it would help me. So those, if I had to pick two, those are probably
knowing that
the
you
two.
made a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is just me. If you're teaching for a different reason, I think you need to reevaluate. I know, and there are some instructors that's not why they teach, and that's fine. But for me, you should be making a difference, even if it's just with one student in one class, one time.
We're talking with instructor Doug Wilson here on the Calm Conversation. A couple more questions for him before we wrap this thing up. You have the rare opportunity to teach at the same school where you went to school. What has that been like, and how has the environment at Waynesburg changed over the years you've seen it?
When I first started, it was surreal. It really was. To walk onto campus as an instructor. At that time, there were still several professors that I had that were still teaching here. And with a couple of minor exceptions, they were ecstatic. Oh, it's great to have, if you know what, when I heard that you were taking over some of these responsibilities, I knew it was going to be in good hands. Now, that may have just been lip service, but it meant the world to me. How have things changed? From a physical standpoint, we are leaps and bounds above where we were when I was a student. And please don't think that I am putting down where we were when I was a student. But technology is, it's taken off. Mm-hmm. When I was a DJ here, we were literally playing music from 2 turntables. And that was the standard for the era. I was the first DJ at CYJ to play a song using a CD player. And I had to bring my own CD player and my own CDs. And now, the overwhelming majority of the music that we play from the radio station is from a hard drive. So leaps and bounds from where we were, and we're still putting out a great product.
What's it like to be the faculty advisor for the same radio station you cut your teeth at years and years ago? That has to be a cool element too.
It is cool, and honestly, 20-something-year-old Doug would probably sit there slack-jawed, because if you had told me then that in however many years I would be the faculty advisor, I would probably have laughed at you. That was not even on my radar.
All right, so 3 questions left. They're probably the deepest.
Oh.
What is the biggest challenge that you've faced throughout your career?
Here at the university or in radio?
It could be here in the radio, here at the university, or in the radio industry. You could have 2 separate ones, whichever.
Biggest challenge in radio initially was my age. I was fresh out of college, and radio, at that time, there were a lot of individuals who had been in radio for decades, and most of them were, let's say, resistant to change. And so me coming in, using CDs, realizing that computers were going to be the next step, that was a real challenge. Here, the biggest challenge, again, my age. I was fairly young. I was only a handful of years older than some of the students that I was teaching. But that was a double-edged sword. In some respects, I could relate to them very well. But at the same time, some of the older faculty saw me as this young, wet-behind-the-ears instructor.
What's the brightest moment that you've had during your career? You could have a couple of those too. What are some bright moments?
In radio, 2 that leap to mind. One, very, very early in my career, in fact, within the first year of getting hired at WAMB, I had the opportunity to do a telephone interview with some of the individuals that worked very closely with Elvis Presley. I'm a huge Elvis fan. And I actually interviewed 2 of the gentlemen that sang backup for Elvis in the 1950s and early 1960s, members of the group the Jordanaires. That then led to a telephone interview with Elvis Presley's first drummer, a gentleman by the name of DJ Fontana. That led to a telephone interview with Elvis Presley's first guitar player, Scotty Moore. And for...
So you're talking to your childhood idols.
Oh my goodness. And it's reached the point now that it takes a lot for me to get flustered when I'm doing a telephone interview. Mm-hmm. Those I was, oh my gosh, was I scared. The second was actually getting to meet the Beach Boys backstage. Again, I had only been at the radio station for a couple, maybe 3 years. They were playing at what was then Star Lake Amphitheater. Long story short, I had gotten an opportunity to do a telephone interview with their lead singer, Mike Love. Asked him if there was any chance of getting to meet him, and he set up backstage passes and actually stood and talked with he and several of the other original members. The concert actually started late because we were standing having a conversation. It was surreal.
Moment.
It really was, yeah.
This is probably the deepest question.
Okay.
If you could go back in time and talk to yourself 20 years ago, what advice would you give him? Actually,
this is easy. In radio, it would be learn how to write news. That is, in my opinion, that's my weak link, because I did not take any news writing courses. I didn't see that was important, because that's not what I wanted to do in radio. Mm-hmm. Now, I learned on the fly at WANB. The other thing that I would probably tell me is don't be afraid to keep trying new things.
Don't be afraid to keep trying new things. Good advice, good advice. Mr. Wilson, thank you so much.
Am I allowed to ask you a question?
Sure.
You can edit this part out.
Okay.
Why am I number 2 and not the first person you interviewed?
It just has to do with, has no order when it comes to relevance of how much I appreciate who you are as a person.
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat with you for a couple of minutes.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you so, so much. Next time on the Calm Conversation, we'll talk to another guest about their career at Waynesburg and in the field of broadcasting and communication.